to enjoy parenting. We've had a very long and interesting hiatus from our normal schedule. There was COVID, and something much happier than that. This is the podcast for people that want to get the most value out of one of the greatest values you can have in your life, your children. I am joined by Lisa VanDamme, the founder of VanDamme Academy and mother of 4. And I am Kyle Steele, the head of school at VanDamme Academy, and I can now say father of 2. So to kick things off, I have to do this because I'm a parent of a new child. This is one of the reasons why we didn't have the podcast last week. Feast your eyes on Edith and Steele. So does that work? You guys can see it, Lisa?
I can hear the squealing from across the internet.
Yeah. So she was she was delivered last Thursday. So we were a little bit tied up. Having a podcast was not in the books for me then. But she is very happy and healthy. So is her mother. And I'm getting by okay. But Lisa, what I was hoping to do, the things that kept me from doing the podcast actually ended up leading to a lot of really interesting parenting moments, challenges as a parent, times where I didn't enjoy being a parent and really did enjoy being a parent. And I just thought they'd be a good springboard for different conversations. If that sounds good to you.
Sounds great.
Okay. So the first time I was out back around Christmas time, I came down with COVID and my wife was 8 months pregnant. And so it was very important for me not to get her sick because, there can be real complications for pregnant women, even if you're otherwise young and healthy. And just more than that, the idea of delivering in a hospital with COVID just sounds like a nightmare. So I ended up spending a week in a hotel because it took that long for me to get over it and to start testing negative. And I won't talk about how hard that was for little old me, because what's more important here is how hard that was for Isaac. 2-year-old Isaac could only somewhat understand what was happening. Like, he knew that daddy was in a hotel. He knew that daddy was sick and he was going to get better. But he was just suffering a great deal of stress and disruption from that. There was a few challenges. There's the challenges my wife Grace faced when here she is 8 months pregnant, quarantining herself while her husband is locked away, isolating, and she's got this 2-year-old that doesn't really understand what's going on. Then there was the challenges when I came back because he, was really deficient in attachment to me, and I needed to make up for that. And then, as soon as he starts to get a little bit back to normal, COVID hits our school really hard. And then dad's pretty busy taking care of that, and everyone's stressed out. And then once that finally gets taken care of, he's got relatives coming into the town because the baby's coming, and then mom and dad are in the hospital. So it's been a tough time for little old Isaac. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to say a little bit about, the way that we tried to handle that, and the way that we hope to compensate for it, and the way we hope to still enjoy being parents while we were doing all of that. So I don't know, where do you think I should start with all of that? Just chronologically? I don't want to just deliver a monologue here.
Oh, whatever you want. It'll be good.
Well, my beautiful wife, Grace, gets all the credit in the world for handling that situation when she was by herself. She did have my sister. My sister was in town visiting, so she did have some backup. But, Isaac was reacting about how you would expect a 2-year-old to act in that situation. He really didn't like it, and he felt kind of scared. The way that showed up the most, at least the thing that's seared in our memories the most, is that when Grace would go to the bathroom, he would melt down because dad's been gone. Now mom's out of the room. Now I'm with this aunt that I only see a couple times in my life. And so he would just scream until either, we just put up with the screaming, or she had him come into the bathroom with her. And so the way that she compensated for that, I think, was very good. She tried to find as many pleasant things for them to do, where they could cuddle and be close to each other, because she didn't have a lot of energy for serious play. and she also uh, uh, she also made sure that she just did things that she normally wouldn't do. Like, we're not a very screen heavy family, but they were watching a movie pretty much every day, just so that she could get a bit of rest and that they could have some very pleasant, peaceful time together. You know, it wasn't a time to die on that hill. But I think that what was helpful for Grace is the ideal that we, promulgate here, is that parenting should be something that you enjoy most of the time. It shouldn't be something that you suffer through. It shouldn't be a burden. And so she did whatever was in her power to make sure that that time was something that she enjoyed with Isaac. And she and my sister both look back on that actually very fondly, that they bonded as sister-in-law and as sisters-in-law.
Yeah.
And that they got to have these special routines with Isaac. Isaac now quotes lines from all those movies all the time, which is pretty fun. And then I tried to do whatever I could from a distance to be close to him. And Grace, this is just a cute story, but I want to share it. Like, Grace baked cookies with Isaac. That was another fun thing that they could do together. He really likes helping out in the kitchen, and they delivered some to my hotel room. Like, they dropped it off outside the door. So I made a video of myself taste testing it, and I said, "Look, I've got." It was like an unboxing video on YouTube. Like, I've got this cookie from my son, and I took a bite out of it. Like, it's a pretty good cookie, Isaac. And he watched that video 6 times. He loved it. And, I found his favorite book, Thanksgiving in the Woods, and I recorded myself reading it so that Grace could play that recording, and I would pause because he always says the refrain "Thanksgiving in the Woods" as we're reading it out loud. So I tried to do as much as I could to have a virtual presence for him. It wasn't much, but anything to kind of make him still feel a bit more attached to me. Those ideas of attachment is really important, and you should enjoy being a parent most of the time. Those helped us in what was an exceptionally challenging time.
Mm-hmm. I have a thought about that. It'll go in a slightly different direction, but I still think it's useful. So that you are able to maintain that attachment, create beautiful memories, enjoy that time, I think speaks to the almost universal possibility of doing that. There are very few circumstances in which you can no longer maintain that kind of stability and normality. Basically, I think we expect or feel that things are going to be traumatic for a child much more often than they actually are. I think that's a hazard that a risk we all run, is we're so concerned about their well-being and we're so sensitive to their reactions to things that sometimes we can project something on them.
Yeah.
That is not project a narrative into the situation that's not actually the case. So it's funny, when you guys were going through that, my first emotional reaction was, oh my gosh, how awful this is. And you're separated from Isaac, and very pregnant Grace is solely responsible for this child. And then my next thought was, now, what if you just traveled for work and you were gone for a week? It's not that much different of a situation, and many, many families are in that situation routinely. Now, there are differences, certainly, but especially for your experiences of it. But
because it was so unexpected and unplanned.
Yeah, unexpected, exactly. But the only reason I bring that up is not to say that they're equivalent, but to say that shift in perspective in my own mind. Well, I went away for a week many times when my kids were little, not many times, but a few times. And that doesn't carry the same sense of trauma that it does when you're thinking of being separated by illness, and it's not really a choice that you made. There's kind of an aspect of it that's forced or foisted upon you. So it just occurred to me that it's important to be cautious about the narrative we place on it, or our expectations of what the feeling of the child will be, so that, when you do the adorable and amazing things that you guys did throughout that week, it can feel to you from your enjoyment perspective like, no, we're keeping things going. Everything's great. And the expectation is he's going to be just fine and he'll get through this wonderfully. And this isn't going to be any enduring trauma. And that, I think that attitude is true. And I think it just makes the experience of helping it become true more effective and more enjoyable.
Yeah. You have to really keep control over you have just as much to say about the meaning of the event as the child does.
Yeah.
And this is particularly hard for me because what that week meant to me, it freaking sucked.
Yeah.
It was painful to just be completely isolated from anything that I cared about in a crappy hotel, and not being able to spend the time I wanted to with Isaac when, we only had so much time left before the new child came along. I wanted that bonding time. And so I had to make sure not to bring all of that meaning into it. And it would have been very easy for Grace to bring her meaning into it. Like, oh, poor me, I'm in such a terrible situation. Here I am alone and pregnant, and
Sure.
Why can't anyone help me? And she didn't do any of that. We stayed together on that. And that can be really a powerful tool that you have if we're cynical, it's like you get to put your own propaganda spin on what's happening, but it's different than that.
Mm-hmm. And related to that, this is not, I hope this doesn't come off as undermining your interpretation of the situation, because I think you have a good understanding of your child, and it makes sense to me. But things like following Grace to the bathroom, that could very easily happen with having nothing to do with the circumstances. So it's very hard to do controlled tests on our children. And I can certainly recall many times that my children followed me to the bathroom in the history of their lives and didn't want to be, went through periods of not wanting to be separated from me for the most arbitrary or unidentifiable of reasons. I just had no idea why they're suddenly feeling this need for attachment. So we also have to just be careful. If we're worried about something, we're going to look for evidence that it's true. Yeah. And I think for enjoyment and sanity and stability purposes, it's just important to always remember there may not be a causal. You have to have I guess maybe thinking of it as this needs to last for a period of time, and it needs to the symptoms have to become serious and enduring in a way before I'm going to worry that this is any kind of real trauma that they're suffering that's going to have a lasting impact on them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you got to recognize, it'd be good for us to have names for different categories and definitions here, but that's too hard to come up with on the spot. But there's something like, this is very clearly a trauma that's going to have a lasting impact on the child. And then there's kind of this in-between category where like, this is a problem that we don't really know what the cause is, and we're going to try to just help it out as best we can. Yeah. So I guess the next thing in this saga that I was really hoping to get to was when I came back, this is just an interesting observation, is that it was actually really clear that he had this attachment deficit with me, that there are ways in which he was kind of distant, but also acting out and being a bit defiant and that sort of thing. And so it was straight out of the book that you and I just read, that and I know that you just said it can be difficult to ascribe meaning and narrative to it, but it's the narrative makes sense enough for me to go with. And the thing that was just necessary was it was helpful for me to identify that, because I knew what the solution was, that I really just need to make sure that I'm getting more quality time with him, that I am engaging with him more, giving him more attention and direction, doing activities with him. And before too long he was on a much more even footing. Now we had I'm interested to hear from your experience, since you have triple the experience that I do with this. Introducing Isaac to the new baby was something that Grace and I gave quite a bit of thought to. For an only child to not be an only child, you hear a lot of stories about jealousy and that sort of thing. And so we wanted to be a bit proactive on that. So we talked a lot during the pregnancy about how there's a new baby coming and this is what the new baby is going to be like and where is the new baby. And Isaac, developed like a fantasy relationship with the new baby where he would like pretend to call her on the phone and would try to give her toys by climbing underneath Grace's dress. Sorry to embarrass you there, Grace. And things like that. And one thing that was really important to me because of COVID, Grace and I had to be in the hospital for a couple of days, and Isaac could not be there.
Yeah.
The hospital that we went to only permitted one support person for the duration of your stay. So I was the only person that could go in and out to see Grace, and Grace couldn't leave the hospital without going through a lot of, paperwork to say I am ending my time here. And so one thing that was kind of important to me is that I didn't want it to be that, has the trouble of being away for a couple of days, although it wasn't that bad. He had 2 grandmas in town that just spoiled him for 2 days. So he was having a fun time with that. But I wanted it to be, the thing that we wanted the most was we wanted our new daughter, Edith, to be something that we all enjoyed together. That rather than like, oh, mom and dad had a kid and now I'm coming into that situation. We wanted it to be, I left the hospital a few hours early. I played with Isaac. We were talking about how we're going to go to the hospital and get the girls. And then we were waiting. And so it was much more like this is an experience that I have with my dad. And when he was holding Edith for the first time, that was an experience he shared with his mom, where he was saying, "Mommy, look at this, Mommy, look at this," and all that. And so that's was kind of the approach that we took. And so far with our son, it's worked very well. I'm not saying that that's what should be duplicated for everybody, but it was just, it was our way of saying, we know that jealousy can be a thing. And more than that, there's a lot of opportunity in this moment to make this something really joyful for Isaac. And we tried to have fun with that, and it worked out for us. I don't know what your experiences have been like introducing new children into the family to the old children.
It sounds very similar. I'd say the difference in experiences, I guess it's just my personality that I had no worries or apprehensions or negative expectations about introducing a new baby. Maybe I had just been under a rock and not heard that I'm supposed to be worried about this, but I just didn't. To me, I was so excited to have the first. I was so excited to have the second. The second meant that the first had a sibling. To me, that was a very exciting thing. Maybe I worried a little bit about making sure, explicitly thought about making sure I give sufficient attention to both of them, but I didn't have any worries or feel like I had to do anything special to lay the groundwork for things to go smoothly. To me, it was just, I cannot wait to have little 2-year-old Lana come in and meet her baby sister. And I still hear I've told you, I got to see the video of Isaac meeting Edith, and my reaction to it was, this is that primal bond. It's almost like anything you do is just kind of an absurdity outside of what is instinctually and naturally there, because you can see if this was somebody else's baby that you just brought over for a visit. Now, I know part of that is the context and the discussions and the anticipation, and there's a lot of groundwork that's been laid even without being conscious of it. But when that baby came into his lap, you can just see how attached, how unique and distinctive that relationship is for him. So I remember those moments so well. And to me, they're some of the most beautiful, most just fundamental joys of life, is introducing a sibling.
It's the same theme that you were mentioning earlier in this podcast, that you have more control over the narrative than you think. That the way that you model reacting to something is going to have a big impact on it. And so for you, it wasn't even there's nothing intentional about it. You were just elated to have a new baby coming.
Yeah.
And so Lana was elated to have the new baby coming.
Yeah.
And we were very excited to have Edith coming. And Isaac got really excited about it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. Well, there's lots more that's been happening with Isaac, but I really monopolized at least 2/3 of this conversation. I don't know if there's anything else that you're coming to today with. It's been so long, we're kind of just playing catch up on
absolutely
regular the highlights of parenting that we've personally experienced. Is there anything that you were hoping to bring up?
Well, we talked about having this what's been on our minds kind of format again. So I jotted down a few things that have been on my mind, but they're utterly unrelated to anything that you just brought up. So just go for it. Okay. All right. So one of the things that's been on my mind recently, I'm going to start with a cute story too, because I think having been out of this for a while, we both get to be a little self-indulgent with our stories. Also, I've been off social media, which is where I shared all my adorable children's stories. So I got to have a place to share them now. The story relates to the issue I wanted to bring up. So the story is that a few weeks ago, Seth said something about when COVID is over. And I don't know if you hear this, not from Isaac, obviously, but probably from kids at school. This is a phrase that's part of their vernacular now, when COVID is over. And we've been hearing it for 2 years from them now, the poor kids, when COVID is over. So for whatever reason, in the context of that conversation, I wanted him to understand that COVID being over didn't mean COVID's going away. I didn't want him to think there's going to be this time where there's this clear demarcation and it's gone and we never see it again or hear about it. So I said, well, I just want to make sure you understand the sense in which COVID's not going to be over. And he said, and I started to explain, and he said, no, Mom, I know. I mean, when the COVID dominated era is over. That was his phrasing, the COVID dominated era. So I did what you exactly did right now. I just laughed out loud and I was like, okay, that's brilliant. Perfect. You're such a smart boy. And then Coco looks over at me and says, I was going to say that. And I said, you were going to say COVID dominated era? And she said, yeah. And I said, do you know what era means? And she said, no, but I was going to say it anyway. So that is my 2 children's personalities in a nutshell. But
that's pretty cute.
that's the cute story. But the setup is, I feel like there's a time we need to tell the kids that COVID is over. And I think that time might be right now, but I wanted to get your thoughts about it. But I was thinking in regard to my children, it hadn't occurred to me until we had that conversation, but it occurred to me after that because they've been using this phrase and because this has been part of the front drop, has been like dominating their existence. I want to say it's over now.
Yeah. Well, so there's 2 questions. Sorry, am I interrupting you?
No, please. I want to hear your thoughts.
There's 2 questions related to it that will be good for us to separate. One is, what conditions would you say mean the COVID era is over? And are we at those conditions now?
Yes.
And smart people could disagree about those 2, especially about the second one. But for the first one, when you say the COVID era is over, would be when you don't think it needs to be part of your thought process so much. And that would really, so I'm inclined to agree that now is a pretty good time to do it because hospitalization is not a major concern in most parts of the country. There's wide ranges of therapeutics and better treatments that are improving outcomes a lot. There's vaccinations that are highly effective and have been taken up by enormous parts of the population. And large parts of the population have natural immunity. And so they don't have much to be worried about in the near future. And I'm not an epidemiologist, nor do I pretend to be one on TV. But there will probably be like another flare up before we truly get to like, COVID's just in the background of life. Yeah. But I'm happy to say to them, like, we don't need to worry about it so much because it's it's not going to be as big of a deal as it was before. It's going to be like the cold and the flu, and other illnesses that just go around. It doesn't have the potential to be a big disruption in our life like it was before. But the only reservation I have is that the COVID era isn't just about COVID, it's about our reaction to COVID.
Right.
And so really for the kids, what defines the COVID era is the fact that everyone tells them to do things. Like they tell them to wear masks, they tell them to wash their hands, they tell them to stay home for 5 days, even though they feel okay.
Yeah.
So to say that the COVID era is over, I think would have to mean that our response to COVID is largely over. That's when I would want to say it. I would say like it's winding down right now.
Yeah.
And there's probably not going to be there's not going to be a VC day where we declare victory over COVID. But yeah, that's how I would, if I imagine myself talking to Seth, and actually Seth and I did talk about this a little bit once after a class one time. Or no, it was after school. He was very interested in why public health officials make rules the way that they do. And I tried to explain that, like, well, if they make a really strict rule and they're wrong, there's low consequences. If they make a loose rule and they're wrong, there's high. So I was explaining public choice theory to him. He's a clever little 10-year-old. Is he 10? 9? 9. Yeah. So anyway, a few thoughts for me about should we tell kids that COVID is over? Not quite yet. At least not in California. Maybe in Florida, you can say that to the kids. Yeah. But I think that we can say it's really winding down, and it's different now than it was, a month or so ago.
No, I think the policy issue is a great point, because I can guarantee Coco will not accept that COVID is over until she cannot wear a mask anymore. So, so those conditions.
I won't accept that COVID is over until I can see Coco's face.
Well, there you go. So, but do you agree with the idea of saying something definite? That was the new thought for me, is that at a certain point I ought to say something definitive and explicit about it that relates to this language they've been using about, is COVID over? Because I want them to feel at some point that officially this is behind them in the ways that matter most.
Well, I'm going to flip around the advice that you were giving me earlier back to you, is that to some extent it can be that the narrative can be defined not through something explicit or intentional, but by your reaction to it.
True.
And that it can be built up piecemeal, like, hey, we're going to go see grandma because we're not worried about getting her sick now. That's one piece of it.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to go, you don't have to wear masks at school anymore. That's another piece of it. And eventually they will figure out that the COVID era is over. And, just as a former history teacher, that's also the way that history works. People didn't know when the Renaissance started. People didn't know when they kind of knew when the Cold War ended, but there's still some debate about that.
Yeah, but your rule for history is something like it has to be how many years?
It has to not be in living memory.
Not in living memory. So hopefully a different rule applies in this case for the kids.
Yeah.
They can decide that era is over before they die.
Now, we're nearly at the end of our time. Can we check if there's super chats that we want to talk to, or have you been keeping an eye on that?
We do have a leftover question, but we'll have to save that for another time. Mary Aline says, some people won't let small children near a new baby. I love that you let Isaac hold her and touch her. I love that it's his baby too. Yes, I still can hear Lana holding little Greta and saying, "Sisto." That there's like that claim is so important to them. And she also says she misses my kid stories on Facebook. Thank you, Mary Aline. I'll look for chances to share more.
I see that there's the question that you want to save for another time. Do you mind us taking just a few minutes, since it is relevant to me, like immediately today, to talk about it? Or you feel
we could talk about it on Clubhouse, but I think we're out of time for today. So we can let's talk about whether to let babies cry it out over on Clubhouse.
All right. Well, it's good to be back, everyone. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.